Welcome to the Chaos Sector. We return to the Matrix. Let's discuss Kamala Harris for a moment. She's the talk of the town right now, either good or bad. Harris is the current Democratic candidate for president after Old Joe decided to not run. Now, many on the right are claiming if Old Joe has decided not to run for president, as it is assumed he was not fit to run, then he should step down as president right now. Old Joe never publicly stated that he wasn't fit to run for president. And see, that's the clever tactic. But if he decided not to run for president and the vice president is taking his place, well, what happened to all of the votes that he obtained? And all of the money he raised? They're given to Harris? Apparently so. But what if those voters don't approve of Harris as the Democratic candidate? It's the epitome of the saying, your votes don't matter. But this is cunning from the Democrats yet. They may run into trouble. Here's the thing, if Biden had actually stepped down, then Harris would have taken over as president. But he hasn't stepped down as president, yet is not running for re-election, and this causes major problems for the upcoming Democratic convention. Oh yes, the delegates that backed Old Joe have a decision to make. But what is missing from all of this? The American people. The mainstream media is pushing Harris as the Democratic candidate, but technically she isn't even the picked nominee to be the Democratic candidate for president. That will happen in the Democratic convention. So what is all this noise about? Old Joe chose her as the nominee, yet his vote doesn't matter for several reasons. But until the Democratic convention takes place, and the delegates, and I guess we can include voters, until all of this takes place, the Democrats don't actually have a candidate to run against Trump. History repeating itself, I see. See, Democrats are trying to make Harris the candidate without the people's vote and those delegates. What do you think will happen in the Democratic convention? Will other Democrats just fold and support Harris? I'm sure there are some Democrats who want to seize this opportunity to become president, right? Maniacs like Gretchen Whitmer and Gavin Newsom wouldn't mind turning America into savage lands. They're in a jam, and it's because they tried to pull a fast one on the American people and forgot about, guess what? Democracy. If Old Joe had just stated he was not fit to run for president, nor was he fit to stay in office, the vice president would have taken over, and you could have had the same gaslighting performed for her going into the Democratic convention up until the presidential debates. But if Harris had taken over, the American people would see how radical she is, and honestly, how lost and confused she would be in that position of power. So they cunningly moved Old Joe out of the way, yet is still in the way as acting president, and Harris has been thrown out here for what? Virtue signaling. There have been some interesting comments made from the likes of Joyless Reed since the coup. Yes, it was a coup, and Harris was in on it the entire time. Joyless Reed stated, quote, "Black people will look real weird if they don't vote for Harris." Okay, quote, "Black Americans risk being shunned by their communities if they do not fall in line and vote for Kamala Harris," Joy Reid warned her followers. In an apparent bid to shame support for the vice president and away from Donald Trump, the firebrand MSNBC host warned black voters they were going to look real weird and real lonely if they do not back the woman of color extraordinaire in November's presidential election. At the same time, she renewed hostilities with black model Amber Rose, who infuriated the liberal talking head by speaking in support of Donald Trump at the Republican National Convention last week. Unquote. First of all, Harris is not even a lock for the Democratic candidate for that November presidential election, because the delegates have not confirmed that they are backing her. Now, at this time, there are developing stories, as it is claimed that Barack Obama, who hadn't backed her, has recently done so. But what stands out here, more than anything within the Democratic Party, is the, get this, existential threat to democracy. You can't place Harris in the position of being the Democratic candidate without a primary. She hasn't received any votes from voters nor delegates. But there was a coup executed here. Old Joe was simply a placeholder for the radicals in the party, and now they're trying to seize the opportunity. Everyone knew Old Joe was a smokescreen for the wackos, and now you see the plan unfolding right before your eyes. Back to Joyless Reed, though, another wacko. It's disgusting how this woman is allowed to spew this nonsense, and not be fired. But second, Harris, if we're being honest here, is not even a black woman. Sure, she's a woman of color, but isn't she racially ambiguous, like you said about Amber Rose? And here's the major blow to the blackness of Harris. She, guess what, is married to a white man? Oh, but that doesn't matter. It's all about her, right? But if you are creating this narrative that the black community would look really weird and lonely if they don't support her, you're painting a picture of a wholesome black family dynamic, similar to the Obamas. Yet, that isn't the case here. Many may not take this into consideration, but Kamala Harris is married to a white man with no children from that marriage, nor from any other relationships she's had. Her husband has children, but none with Kamala. On the surface, it doesn't seem like a big deal. But if you look at her policies supporting abortion, advocating for defunding the police, and other radical ideologies from the far left, Harris represents the complete opposite of the ideal wholesome black family unit. And then there's more. I guess the black community is the weirdest and loneliest, because this same community you speak of didn't support or vote for her in prior Democratic debates. She didn't get any support from any of the groups they claim she's a part of, because her poll numbers reflect that. Her popularity prior to this monumental execution of gaslighting was horrific. And we have to include, guess who? Women in that data. Now keep in mind, the main policy she is running on against Trump will be abortion. Yet even with this women's right issue, she was still unpopular and didn't receive any support in her campaigns. So the same person somehow has a 180 and now she's the second coming of Obama? Gaslighting is a hell of a drug, my friends. We all remember she was obliterated by Tulsi Gabbard on her record and policies. But she has that, quote, Obama effect, so she stays in the race off that alone. Let's be honest, this is once again about race. Yet we have to keep reiterating the point. Black people, especially black women, who are all of a sudden championing her, didn't vote for this same quote, black woman against old Joe. Rather, they chose a white man over a woman of color. And to make it appear there was some concern about diversity and representation for people of color, they demanded old Joe choose a black woman as his vice president. Individuals like Simone Sanders voted for Bernie Sanders. She had the opportunity to back a woman, and a woman of color, yet she chose to back a socialist old Jewish man instead. And on top of that, this is the same person who stated, quote, I don't think white people should be leading the Democratic Party right now, unquote. Who did Angela Rye vote for? Who the hell knows, but I don't recall her supporting Kamala Harris at that time. What about any of that CNN panel who were the main antagonist of attacking Trump? Who did they vote for as the Democratic candidate for president? We can dig and find out, but we're going to assume it wasn't Kamala Harris. And since we know Hillary Clinton and old Joe were the recent candidates, none of these black political analysts supported or voted for Kamala Harris. But if you check their social media or current panel discussions on MSNBC and CNN, oh, it's all praise to Kamala Harris for president? Republicans don't have this absurd behavior in their party. Sure, they have their share of wackos. But since the political matrix is rooted in race and racism, it sticks out like a sore thumb that the left isn't supporting people of color, yet always blabbering about white privilege and white supremacy. You're giving white people that alleged privilege by voting for them instead of a woman of color. Insanity. And that is proof that racism is all an illusion to divide and conquer. Old Joe was picked as the smokescreen for the ultra-liberals running the party, and those black voters attempted to hide behind those ultra-liberals, created a false sense of voter integrity by demanding old Joe to pick a black woman as his vice president, or else he wouldn't receive their votes. Truth is, those black people would vote for a Democrat if he chose a black woman or not, but they knew he would do it anyway, because the Democrats need those votes to consistently compete with their opposition. In other words, that so-called demand was nothing more than a political ruse, all to usher in this force of black women. But they are stuck in the greatest force of hypocrisy, because they didn't even support Kamala Harris as the Democratic candidate. Let me drill this home. LaTosha Brown demands old Joe to choose a black woman as vice president, but they themselves voted for a white man as president. What merit does demanding a white man choose a black woman as vice president have? It's empty of purpose. other than the true intentions behind that demand, slither her into becoming the president. And that's where we are right now. LaTosha Brown is the co-founder of Black Votes Matter, but it should be changed to Black Women Votes Matter, because that's who is in charge of the Democratic Party. Yep, Black women control that party, my friends, behind closed doors. That administration was solely based on diversity, equity, and inclusion at the highest or second highest level. It checked off many boxes, of course. First female vice president, first female of color as vice president, highest ranking female official in U.S. history, first African American and first Asian American vice president. Oh yeah, this is all a result of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's just the facts. Yes, many on the left are trying to claim that is insulting to Harris, to suggest her being the vice president was based on diversity of hire as opposed to her merits. Wait a minute, aren't you contradicting yourselves here? Of course you are. Isn't this what you want? Oh, when it comes to being the vice president or even the president, when some claim it was based on diversity, equity, and inclusion, oh, that's insulting. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. But LaTosha Brown literally stated that this was the requirement for old Joe to get the black vote. He had to choose a woman, check. And he had to choose a woman of color, check. There is nothing in that requirement regarding policies, all diversity, equity, and inclusion. You created that reality, so don't run away from it. In fact, what merits does Harris have? What has she done as vice president? They tried to sweep it all under the rug. The fact that she was basically appointed as the border czar, which was a national disaster, and still is, by the way. What has Harris done as vice president? What about her time as a prosecutor in California? Not going to get many black men to vote for her, because she locked up her share of them for nonviolent crimes, which she all of a sudden is advocating against. And the left-wing media has the nerve to slate this as the prosecutor versus the convict. Guess they forgot about the black men she threw in jail for the same charges she now is trying to appeal to them for. And let me mention that issue, Van Jones, who is at least a bit more reasonable, attempted to pull in those black men to support Harris.
They worked very hard to attract black men into the Republican Party. And they were getting a little bit of momentum there. There were a lot of black men who were saying, no, the Democrats don't do anything for us, and Biden's weak, and they're starting to look over there at the Republican Party. You start insulting black women, you're going to see something you haven't seen before. Black men are not going to put up with that. I want to send a warning, as clear as I can. I was on a phone call with 20,000 black men. The word protect came up about 1,000 times. Yeah. Protect this sister. Protect this sister. We're going to protect her. Protect her. You're about to see something you haven't seen before. Look, people messed around with Hillary Clinton and said a bunch of mean stuff to her. Black men set that out. We won't set this out. So I don't think that the Republican Party understands that all the work that they did trying to get us over there, two more days of this?
That's a futile attempt, and a bit pathetic, to be honest. First of all, black men have already shown more support for Donald Trump prior to that issue. Second, black men specifically aren't too fond of Harris anyway, due to her record. And it's not like she's married to a black man, she's married to a white man. She supports abortion, which black men by population do not support. Nothing in her policies align with black men as they align more with conservative values by general data. And that data is reflected by Trump receiving 8% of the black vote, which were predominantly men. Now put this into perspective for a moment.
Hold on, there was a bit more from that segment that I wanted to point out. Abby Phillip made a statement regarding the voting base. Take a listen.
It's going to be a problem.
Look, and the strategy is in part also to draw a wedge between black men and black women, which if you listen to Van, he's saying that's not going to work, but that is the strategy, is to say, oh, they're so focused on women, black women, they're not focused on you.
Stop it. You know damn well that's not true. That's not something Republicans are doing. It's naturally happening based on voting. And let's be honest here, when's the last time the Democratic Party said something about black men? Don't worry, I'll wait. Now, how many times has the Democratic Party said something about black women? All the time. See? It's in their ideology to focus on black women because they make up damn near 100% of the vote from that community. And they know they can't really draw in black men because their policies are complete lunacy. It's naturally a wedge between both genders. One focuses on the political integrity of the vote, while the other focuses on the political identity of the vote. Two different worlds. Can she explain why black men don't support Democrats? Another question, why do black women support Democrats at almost 100% rate? Here's another question, why do those same black women vote for white men instead of the very woman of color you're talking about right now? And then there's another question. The 8% of the black vote in 2016, which were black men, and the increase of that support over the years, is Abby suggesting that those black men support a white supremacist in Donald Trump? After all, he's racist, right? So do those black men hate their race by supporting a white supremacist? Nonsense. See, the more the truth comes out, the more outrageous these situations become. Abby sold out. She was a White House reporter for media outlets such as Politico, a bit to the left, but overall is actually nonpartisan. Many appearances on C-SPAN early in her career, which was perhaps the most nonpartisan media outlet one could be a part of. Although we can say she was on the left, now she's far left, so far left she's out of bounds at CNN as a host. I say this because I've examined her demeanor, her rhetoric, and she's flat out gave up all integrity she once had. She was a White House reporter for CNN, but it's completely different when you're front and center, with millions of viewers. Simply put, she's following the money, and in doing so, she compromises her integrity for a paycheck, and that paycheck demands she pushes propaganda for the network. It's sad, but that's an example of many black women who follow the money and power, but don't follow integrity. It says a lot about the voting base of the Democratic Party, right? All about money and power, policies are irrelevant. And that, my friends, is the divide between black men and black women politically. So if we're talking about politics, it is black women who created that divide from black men. Based on the political studies, men are more conservative in nature and women are more liberal in nature. Men have principles when it comes to integrity, respect, and their public reputation in connection to those characteristics. So it's not a surprise that black men are not a locked vote for Democrats like black women because the policies of the Democratic Party don't align with those of black men. Going into this presidential election, Democrats are not only lacking the support from black men, but even a few droplets of black women have departed. And if you look at other groups, they don't have a firm stock of support. So dare we say that the Democrats need black men to win? It's never going to happen. But it doesn't stop Abby Phillip and Van Jones from attempting to gaslight black men into thinking a black woman is being racially attacked. They see through the bullshit, and they're not falling for it.
8% of the black vote were black men for Trump. So this means 92% of black women voted for old Joe. That's disturbing. And even more disturbing, none of that percentage of black women voted for Harris to be the presidential candidate. As far as it being about her being a quote sister, what cultural connection does Harris have that warrants the phrase sister? Sister and brother are terms used in the black community, representing a sense of unity, family, and camaraderie. Harris does not share any of those qualities in connection to the black community. And that's not just what we've examined. Many in the black community have already stated this on social media. Some Republicans have called her a DEI vice president. Some have even claimed she was incompetent. They've called old Joe incompetent, a puppet for the Democrats, confused, an old stumbling, bumbling fool who has plagiarized all throughout his political career and stated his son was a crackhead. Well, all of those claims have been proven to be true. I mean, if it's true, you know. Kamala Harris is not exempt from being blasted for flaws she has just because she's a woman of color. Catering to her based on this, creating a protective shell around her, is justifying the belief that she is in fact a DEI vice president. And well, the incompetence comment, that's political mudslinging on both sides. The left has called the right incompetent as well. Then there's the low blow about Harris's sexual past, where some have claimed, well, she slept her way into power. Yeah, that's a low blow indeed. But is that something new in politics? Stormy Daniels, a porn star, was involved in politics. How did she come about? Through mudslinging. Digging in the mud for political gems you can use against your opponents. I mean, it's a dirty game. But here's the key to all of this, because they're going to make this a empathetic talking point for Harris. If old Joe was demanded to pick a black woman as vice president, by default, this is an example of a DEI hire. If a company hires a person of color, simply off that, and it doesn't matter about their experience or skills, that is a diversity hire. Now, there's nothing wrong with a DEI hire if that person is qualified, or we can even suggest shows potential. That's fine. But Harris's record shows that her being chosen would be problematic, and old Joe knew this. If I'm not mistaken, old Joe and Harris butted heads on policies, which were so far left it perhaps contributed to his mental decline. He was too stressed out. He lost his mind, literally. Something that the left-wing media doesn't want to acknowledge is old Joe was, and still is, a moderate Democrat. He doesn't agree with the radical ideology, but he had no choice to concede for the position of power. Kamala Harris was the complete opposite of a moderate Democrat. So we all know that administration was an example of oil and water. It didn't mix well together. So despite the narrative that was pushed creating this black woman under attack narrative, there isn't any proof of it. Just more suggestive programming. What about that dreaded 60-minute interview where she was confronted about being slated the most liberal senator in 2020? She tried to claim it was then Republican Vice President Mike Pence who slated her that. But the interviewer cited a nonpartisan government tracker that rated her as the most liberal senator. And the look on her face went from smiles to unadulterated fear in the blink of an eye. Let's watch that moment, just for entertainment value.
It was at this moment that she knew. She fucked up.
That smile, although out of embarrassment, is also quite frightening, because it's that same fake smile that she uses while pushing those very same radical policies. Mind you, Kamala Harris was rated more liberal and further left than Bernie Sanders. If you're more liberal and further left than a self-proclaimed socialist, then what the hell does that say about you? It definitely doesn't align with the population who supports Sanders, including black people, but it's not even a possibility for a lot of independent voters. That also includes black people. It's like being caught lying about your employment history. You didn't have 10 years of experience as an assistant manager. You never worked in that field. Your application has been thrown in the garbage. And it's not because you're a woman or woman of color. You're just not qualified for the position. Simple as that.
Yeah, it's quite embarrassing for Democrats, but this is the web they weaved. They should have backed Tulsi Gabbard when she was a Democrat. But, see, the leaders of the party are so insane. Their candidates have to align with that. Gabbard was too sophisticated for the wacky circus. It was time to move out, and that's what she did. Quite ironic, though. Gabbard exposes Harris in the Democratic debates years ago, and yet Harris is currently running for president. But despite this position she has, Gabbard is in a far better position in the Republican Party. And the money she raised? Well, is this classified as money raised for her campaign? What campaign? She didn't have one. Anywho, Harris set a fundraising record, raising $81 million in 24 hours. Now, obviously, the bulk of that came from Hollywood donors, such as George Clooney. So it's not as if the American people dug into their bank accounts and withdrew thousands of dollars over that 24-hour period. And that has been updated. Apparently, it has reached over $200 million raised. Yet the American people are struggling with gas prices, groceries, and can barely pay their bills. Where is that money coming from? Where it always comes from, the elites. In the real world, you can't buy a presidential candidate, but in the political matrix, this is how they select their preferred candidate. We saw it with Hillary Clinton. It was exposed that the primaries were rigged in her favor for the 2016 Democratic Convention. We saw it with old Joe even earlier this year, where he won the primaries in a landslide. Impossible. And now they have rigged everything once again by having wealthy donors push Harris as the Democratic candidate for president. Wealthy donors pushed Hillary Clinton, wealthy donors pushed old Joe, and now wealthy donors are pushing Harris. The difference, though, is people still have to vote. All of this is an illusion. Trump has actual voters. He's the Republican candidate. Harris is raising all of that money, but you want to know where $200 million will end up? You may be shocked by this, but that money is secretly paid to voters to cast votes for Harris. Yep, and we can suggest that this is why black women make up 90% of the black vote for Democrats. They're paid to vote Democrat. It's obvious. I mean, they had to be paid to vote Democrat. There's no way they genuinely voted for an old white man over Kamala Harris, right? But for money, sure, we'll support the old white man over a woman of color. And trust me, $200 million can be spread out in the country. Fairly easy, my friends. 200 million divided by 50 states is $4 million. So that's $4 million for every state. Now, if you divide that by how many people will vote for Harris, you see how easy it is to literally buy votes. It's sad but true. Yeah, they'll say this type of activity is prohibited, such as personal spending of campaign funds, blah, blah, blah. But we know the truth here. Payments in the range of 100 to 500 or even thousands, depending on the cost of living in each state's cities. These payments can bring out many voters. And I think it's evident in how they're claiming she set a record of $200 million in fundraising. Keep in mind, this is not a new candidate, this is the vice president. For the last 3 years, who was unpopular, didn't receive any votes, dropped out of a prior presidential run due to no support. From those very same donors, by the way, got blasted by Tulsi Gabbard. And the biggest point, the black community didn't support her previously. It's not like Kamala Harris is the newest Democrat, fresh blood, popped up out of nowhere, talking that good political game, energizing the American people. That candidate would pose a real threat to Trump based on the new energy she brings to the political landscape. No, this is the same lackluster vice president who sat beside a senior citizen, laughing behind his back the entire time. That's not a different person, although left-wing media is trying to create one. So everyone with half a brain can come to the conclusion, this is all manufactured by the elites, and it's up to the American people to do the right thing, and don't let an illusion become a reality. Perhaps the biggest advantage she will have, that being abortion, is not as much of an advantage when you break it down. Trump says it should be left to the states to decide, which is a moderate perspective on the issue, so it's not really a complete advantage for Harris. The border, the economy, and abortion will be the biggest issues on both sides, and I think the American people will focus on what impacts them the most. It is a fact that the American people were better off economically under Trump's administration, and there wasn't this mass migration of illegal immigrants, including the crimes they committed, and the Ukrainian-Russian war. Like many have stated, if Trump sticks to policy, he wins in a landslide. But if he falls to the temptation to mudsling, it plays right into the Democrats' wheelhouse. But even still, I don't think it will matter. Trump could blast Harris just like every other opponent and still win. And a very devastating attack Trump will have is how Harris decided to skip the congressional address by Netanyahu. Shows how much she cares about foreign relations, right? Vice President Harris, shall I prepare a speech for the congressional address with the Prime Minister? I'm not attending. I have a college sorority event to attend. Okay. But don't you think that will be good for the optics? Showing leadership and support as vice president? It's fine. I'm going to be president regardless. I have black women by my side. But it's the Prime Minister, Vice President Harris. Don't you think that's a bit more important considering the global relevance to your presidential campaigning? Israel is one of our greatest allies. I think this is more important at this time. Shut up and go get me a coffee and a slice of cheesecake. Not a good look when you ditch a congressional speech from a foreign ally. for party time at a college sorority. It shows she doesn't take the job that serious. That will disappoint a lot of voters come November, my friends. This is why her popularity was horrific, and her approval rating as vice president was just as horrible. It's behavior like this that shows her character. Say what you will about Trump, but when it's time to be serious, such as meeting foreign leaders, allies, or foes, he takes that serious. It might get so bad for Democrats, you might have those liberal celebrities running for president to save the party. Over the next few weeks, the gaslighting will continue, the racial rhetoric will increase, and gender will be an issue. But I will say this in closing. Harris may have a smile on her face, but she knows the mainstream media can't help her in the debates against the orange puppet. This is the chaos sector.